Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve, Part 2, Chapter 28, A Stranger in the Mountains of Heaven. Valentine's hand drew subtle, complicated shapes in the air above the girl's bowed head, and her face was calm and smiling, little suspecting that she was being blessed by the League's worst enemy. Tom watched from behind a shrine to the sky goddess. His eyes had known who the red-robed monk was all along, and now his brain caught up with them in a flurry of understandings. Captain Cora had said that the 13th floor elevator had been haunting the mountains. It must have dropped Valentine off in the crags near Batmont-Gompa, and he had come the rest of the way on foot, creeping into the city like a thief. But why? What secret mission could have brought him here? Tom didn't know what to feel. He was frightened, of course, to be so close to the man who had tried to murder him, but at the same time he was thrilled by Valentine's daring. What courage it must have taken to sneak into the great stronghold of the League under the very noses of London's enemies. It was the sort of adventure that Valentine had written about in books that Tom had read again and again, huddled under the blankets in the third-class apprentice's dorm with a torch long after lights out. Valentine finished his blessings and moved on. For a few moments Tom lost sight of him among the crowds in the square, but then spotted the red robe climbing on up the broad central stairway. He followed at a safe distance, past beggars and guards and hot food vendors, none of whom guessed that the red-robed figure was anything more than one of those crazy holy men. Valentine had his head bowed now, and he climbed quickly, so Tom did not feel in any danger as he hurried along, 20 or 30 paces behind him. But he still didn't know what he should do. Hester deserved to know that her parents' murderer was here. Should he find her? Tell her? But Valentine must be on some important mission for London, maybe gathering information so the engineers would know exactly where to aim Medusa. If Hester killed him, Tom would have betrayed his whole city. He climbed onward, ignoring the pain of his broken ribs. Around him, the terraces of Batmont-Gompa were speckled with lamps and lanterns, and the envelopes of balloon taxis glowed from within as they rose and fell, like strange sea creatures swimming around a coral reef. And slowly he realised that he didn't want Valentine to succeed in whatever he was planning. London was no better than Tunbridge Wells, and this place was old and beautiful. He wouldn't let it be smashed. "It's Valentine!" he shouted, charging up the stairs, trying to warn the passers-by of the danger, but they just stared at him without understanding. And when at last he reached the red-robed man and pulled his hood down, he found the round, startled face of a pilgrim monk blinking back at him. He looked around wildly and saw what had happened. Valentine had taken a different stairway out of the central square, leaving Tom following the wrong red robe. He went running down again. Valentine was barely visible, a red speck climbing through the lantern light towards the high places of the city and the eyrie of the great air destroyers. "It's Valentine!" shouted Tom. But none of the people around him spoke English. Some thought he was mad, others thought that he meant Medusa was about to strike. A wave of panic spread across the square, and soon he heard warning gongs sounding in the densely packed terraces of the shops and inns below. His first thought was to find Hester, but he had no idea where to look. Then he ran to a balloon taxi and told the pilot, "Follow that monk!" But the woman smiled and shook her head, not understanding. "Feng Hua!" Tom shouted, remembering Anna Fang's League name, and the taxi pilot nodded and smiled, casting off. He tried to calm himself as the balloon rose. He would find Miss Fang. Miss Fang would know what to do. He remembered how she had trusted him with the Jenny during the flight across the mountains, and felt ashamed for turning on her in the council meeting. He was expecting the taxi to take him to the governor's palace, but instead it landed near the terrace where the Jenny Hanover was berthed. The pilot pointed towards an inn which clung to the underside of the terrace above like a house martin's nest. "Feng Hua," she said helpfully. "Feng Hua." For a panic-stricken moment, Tom thought that she had carried him to an inn with the same name as Miss Fang. Then, on one of the establishment's many balconies, he caught sight of the aviatrix's blood-red coat. He thrust all the money he had at the pilot, shouting, "Keep the change!" and left her staring at the unfamiliar faces of Quirk and Chrome as he raced away. Miss Fang was sitting at a balcony table with Captain Cora and the stern young Kalarian flyer who had been so angry at Tom's outburst earlier. They were drinking tea and deep in discussion, but they all leaped up as Tom blundered out onto the balcony. "Where's Hester?" he demanded. "Down on the mooring platforms in one of her moods," said Miss Fang. "Why?" "Valentine!" he gasped. "He's here, dressed as a monk!" The inn's musicians stopped playing, and the sound of the alarm gongs in the lower city came drifting through the open windows. "Valentine here," sneered the Kalarian girl. "It's a lie. The barbarian thinks he can frighten us." "Be quiet, Scyther!" Miss Fang reached across and gripped Tom by the arm. "Is he alone?" As quickly as he could, Tom told her what he had seen. She made a hissing sound through her clenched teeth. "He has come after our air fleet. He means to cripple us." "One man cannot destroy an air fleet," protested Cora, smiling at the notion. "You've never seen Valentine at work," said the aviatrix. She was already on her feet, excited at the prospect of crossing swords with London's greatest agent. "Scyther, go and rouse the guard. Tell them the High Aries are in danger." She turned to Tom. "Thank you for warning us," she said gently, as if she understood the agonizing decision he had to make. "I've got to tell Hester," he protested. "Certainly not," she told him. "She will only get herself killed or kill Valentine, and I want him kept alive for questioning. Stay here until it is all over." A last ferocious smile, and she was gone, down the steps and out of the panicked inn, with Cora at her heels. She looked grim and dangerous and very beautiful, and Tom felt himself brushed by the same fierce love which he knew Cora and the Kalarian girl and the rest of the League must feel for her. But then he thought of Hester and what she would say when she learned that he'd seen Valentine and hadn't even told her. "Great Quirk!" he shouted suddenly. "I'm going to find her!" Scyther just stared at him, not stern anymore, just frightened and very young. As he ran towards the stairs, he shouted back at her, "You heard what Miss Fang said! Raise the alarm!" Out onto dark ladderways again, down the mooring platform where the Jenny Hanover hung at anchor. "Hester! Hester!" he shouted, and there she was, coming towards him through the glow of the landing lights, tugging the red shawl up across her face. He told her everything, and she took the news with the cold, silent glare he had expected. Then it was her turn to run, and he was following her up the endless stairs. The wall made its own weather. As Tom and Hester neared the top, the air grew thin and chill, and big fluttering snowflakes brushed their faces like butterfly wings. They could see the lantern light on a broad platform ahead, where a gas tanker was lifting away empty from the High Aries. Then there was an unbelievable gout of flame shooting out of the face of the wall, and another, as if it were dragons, not airships, that were stabled there. Caught in the blast, the tanker's envelope exploded, white parachutes blossoming around it as it began to fall. Hester stopped for a moment and looked back, flames shining in her eye. "He's done it! We're too late. He's fired the air fleet." They ran on. Tom's ribs hurt him at every breath and the cold air scorched his throat, but he kept as close behind Hester as he could, crunching through snow along a walkway to the platform outside the Aries. The bronze gates stood open, and a crowd of men were pouring out, shielding their faces from the heat of the blaze within. Some of them were dragging wounded comrades, and near the main door, Tom saw Cora being tended by two of the ground crew. The aviator looked up as Tom and Hester ran to him.
"Valentine," he groaned. "He bluffed his way past the sentries, saying he wanted to bless our airships. He was setting his explosive when Anna and I arrived. Oh, Tom, we never imagined that even a barbarian would try something like this. We weren't prepared. Our whole anti-fleet. My poor Mokli Mbembe."
He broke off, coughing blood. Valentine's sword had pierced his lung. "What about Miss Fang?" asked Tom. Cora shook his head. He did not know. Hester was already stalking away into the searing heat of the hangars, ignoring the men who tried to call her back. Tom ran after her. It was like running into an oven. He had an impression of a huge cavern, with smaller caverns opening off it, the hangars where the League's warships were housed. Valentine must have gone quickly from one ship to the next, placing thesaurus bombs. Now, only their buckling ribs were visible in the white, hot heart of the blaze. "Hester!" shouted Tom, his voice lost in the roar of flames, and saw her a little way ahead of him, hurrying down a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the wall. "I'm not following her in there," he thought. "If she wants to get herself trapped and roasted, that's her lookout." But as he turned back towards the safety of the platform, the ammunition in the gondolas of the burning airships caught, and suddenly there were rockets and bullets flying everywhere, bursting against the stone walls and howling through the air around him. The tunnel was closer than the main entrance, and he scrambled into it, whispering prayers to all the gods he could think of. Fresh air was coming from somewhere in front of him, and he realised that the passage must lead through the wall to one of the gun emplacements on the western face. "Hester!" he shouted. Only echoes replied, muddled with the echoing roar of the fires in the hangar. He pressed on. At a fork in the tunnel lay a huddled shape, a young airman cut down by Valentine's sword. Tom breathed a sigh of relief that it was not Hester or Miss Fang, and then felt guilty, because the poor man was dead. He studied the branching tunnel. Which way should he go? "Hester!" he shouted nervously. Echoes. A stray bullet from the hangar came whining past, and struck sparks off the stonework by his head. Choosing quickly, he ducked down the right-hand passage. There was another sound now, closer and sharper than the dull roar of the fires, a thin, bird-like sound of metal on metal. Tom hurried down a slippery flight of steps, saw light ahead, and ran towards it. He emerged into the cold and the fluttering snow on a broad platform, where a rocket battery gazed out towards the west. Flames flapped and tore in an iron brazier, lighting the ancient battlements, the sprawled bodies of the rocket crew, and the wild shimmer of swords as Valentine and Miss Fang battled each other back and forth across the scrabbled snow. Tom crouched in the shadows at the tunnel's mouth, clutching his aching ribs and staring. Valentine was fighting magnificently. He had torn off his monk's robes to reveal a white shirt, black breeches, long black boots, and he parried and thrust and ducked gracefully under the aviatrix's blows, but Tom could see that he had met his match. Holding her longsword, two-handed, Miss Fang drove him back towards the rocket battery and the bodies of the men he had killed, anticipating every blow he made, feinting and swinging, jumping into the air to avoid a low backstroke, until at last she smashed the sword from his hand. He went down onto his knees to reach for it, but her blade was already at his throat, and Tom saw a dark rill of blood start to stain the collar of his shirt. "Well done," he said, and smiled the smile that Tom remembered from that night in the gut, a kind, amused, utterly sincere smile. "Well done, Feng Hua." "Quiet," she snapped. "This isn't a game." Valentine laughed. "On the contrary, my dear Windflower, it's the greatest game of all, and my team appears to be winning. Haven't you noticed that your air fleet is on fire? You really should have tightened up your security arrangements. I suppose because the League has had its own way for 1,000 years, you think you can rest on your laurels. But the world is changing." "He's playing for time," thought Tom, but he could not see why. Cornered on this high platform, unarmed, with no chance of escape, what did Valentine hope to gain by taunting the aviatrix? He wondered if he should go forward and pick up the fallen sword and stand by Miss Fang until help arrived. But there was something so powerful and dangerous about Valentine, even in defeat, that he dared not to show himself. He listened, hoping to catch the sounds of soldiers coming down the tunnel, and wondering what had become of Hester. All he could hear was the distant clamour of gongs and fire bells from the far side of the wall, and Valentine's flirtatious, half-mocking voice. "You should come and work for London, my dear. After all, this time tomorrow the shield wall will be rubble. You will need a new employer. Your league is finished." And light burst from above, the harsh beam of an airship searchlight raking across the snow. The aviatrix reeled blindly backwards, and Valentine leaped up, snatching his sword, pulling her hard against him as he drove it home. For a moment, the two of them stumbled together like drunken dancers at the end of a party, close enough to Tom's hiding place for him to see the bright blade push out through the back of Miss Fang's neck, and hear her desperate choking whisper, "Hester Shaw will find you. She will find you." Then Valentine wrenched his sword free and let her fall, turning away, leaping up onto the battlements as the 13th floor elevator came looming down out of the searchlight's glare.